This is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Small Business Update with Tom Sullivan, exclusively on ASBN.com.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Welcome into another edition of the U.S. Chamber Small Business Update, exclusively right here at ASBN.com. From economic pressures to policy decisions coming out of Washington, right now, many small business owners are feeling uncertain about what's ahead. Joining us now is Tom Sullivan, the Vice President of Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He's fighting the good fight for small business owners every day. So Tom, thank you so much for joining us on the show once again. I know that a lot of people, specifically small business owners, get a lot out of your visit with us here. So we're seeing some crazy times out there right now, right? There's some good, there's some bad, there's some ugly, but you're seeing data that said uncertainty is kind of dampening the outlook and hindering plans for growth. Talk to us about that.
Well, thank you. So first of all, Jim, it's great to be with you again. But this is a time when you and I can pretend to be economists, talking about on the one hand and on the other hand. Let me just break it down to a good news, bad news.
Okay.
The good news when we see data that comes from our friends at Vistage, Wall Street Journal, CEO Survey, NFIB, MetLife, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Small Business Index. Mm-hmm. The good news is that confidence and optimism on main streets all across the country is still above where it was in October. So that's the good news.
Okay.
The bad news is we're starting to see a downward trend on investments for growth. Okay. So for instance, in one of NFIB's studies, they talk about capital investment. Did you make capital investments in the last 3 months? Are you planning on making capital investments in the next 3 months? And that has tracked downward. Okay. Again, one of the more traditional measures are, hey, have you hired anybody? You think you're going to hire anybody? Yeah. Certainly an indicator of growth. That also, unfortunately, has trended downward. So we're getting a little bit nervous about that trends downward. Yeah. And really, the one word that kind of summarizes the why is uncertainty.
Okay. Is it because of the president's desire to put these tariffs in place and we don't know what that's going to mean, and some of the things that we see out there haven't changed yet? I mean, he's only been in office, I think, 60 days. But in terms of the cost of living and the cost of eggs, which seems to be all the top stories these days, but we haven't really seen gas prices come down. We haven't seen, the price of groceries come down. Interest rates a little bit, but not huge. Is that what's causing this? Do you think everyone had these huge expectations and they're just not seeing it yet?
Well, I think you're really onto something when you talk about expectations and not seeing it yet.
Yeah.
You mentioned tariffs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as this show goes on. Mm-hmm. I wish it were so simple that it was one specific policy decision that's causing uncertainty. Right. It's really not. I mean, Jim, you and I talk every month, and we've talked consistently about small businesses worry about inflation.
Yeah, that's right.
We've actually seen in the latest data that small businesses' expectations of inflation going upwards is actually on the rise. That's what's causing uncertainty. Okay. Now, there's a ton of different factors in inflation expectations going up. Interest rates, as you had said, are still pretty high, but the cost of keeping and hiring good employees is going up. And so when something like tariffs comes into the picture, and the small businesses who deal with imports and exports, whether it's for their own materials or they're afraid of retaliatory tariffs when they're trying to export, all of a sudden in their mind, they're thinking, oh no, that's going to get more expensive too. That feeds into that uncertainty that we're seeing out on main streets right now.
So what steps can Washington take to provide more stability and support for small businesses?
Well, right now, when we hear about concerns over inflation, which I think President Trump would say was part of the mandate he received to get the economy in order through his election.
Right.
Bring down costs, bring down inflation. Really got to narrow in like a laser beam on what brings down inflation. So energy, for instance, one of the things we're really concerned about at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is how do those tariffs on Canada actually impact the cost of gasoline? The U.S., the folks who buy gas at the gas station, what some of them could realize over the next couple of months is that the prices have been stable for a long time because of the flow of Canadian crude down to our refineries in the Gulf Coast. That's kept energy prices relatively stable. Yeah. So what happens now when that Canadian heavy crude all of a sudden is subject to a big tariff? And the answer is, unfortunately, that the price at the pump's going to go up, and that is the wrong way to approach bringing down costs. So I think focusing on energy security is a good idea. I think if we can get the president to rethink about what will lower inflation, I think the president can certainly get back on track really quickly. Yeah. And then there's certainly one thing that Congress and the White House and the business community is moving ahead on full steam, and that is making those 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent. When small business owners know what they have to pay in taxes and what they can reinvest, that provides the certainty they're looking for. So we have a remarkable opportunity now to make those 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent. I was on Capitol Hill earlier this month with a group of small business owners, and they told their stories about how when they receive a benefit from those tax cuts, they pour it right back into their business. Jim, there was this one small business owner, a small IT company in Maryland. He got about 20 employees. One of his employees, because of the tax cuts, was moved from part-time to full-time. Yeah. Now you think, well, so what? Happens all the time.
Right.
But what was so neat to hear his story was by moving full-time, she was eligible for a 401k. And then when she and her husband went to buy a house, they actually could leverage down payment on the 401k. Sure. That's incredible. Sure. And that's what those tax cuts are about. Right. Freeing up cash, not only in the business to reinvest, but also helping the employees that are working so hard.
No question about it. And as you know, small business owners rely on that cash available to them to expand their businesses, just as you were saying about from part-time to full-time. But there's a lot of businesses out there that, might buy a new fleet of trucks to say, look, we're going to take over a new territory. Or maybe we're going to acquire another company that's in our space. It really does. It means a lot. And should we feel somewhat confident that those tax cuts will be maintained?
Jim, the way that I put it is right now we're on the 30-yard line, marching down the field to get to the opponent's end of the field and hopefully into the end zone. And I think that we're going to get to our opponent's 20-yard line, by the summer, by the end of the summer. But for any of you who watch football and the team, the team has a really bad kicker, that last 20 yards is the hardest part of the field. That's right. And I think that we're going to be at that 20-yard line end of August, September. That's when it's really going to matter, where small business owners insist that the president and Congress take action to prevent a massive tax hike from happening at the end of this year.
Yeah. What's your message to the small business owners that are watching right now? What can they do as a small business owner to influence that decision? Should they write to their congressman, write to the White House, make phone calls, emails? What can they do?
So, Jim, thank you for asking that question about what's the call to action. The call to action by small business owners is to tell their story, convince members of Congress they're not multimillionaires that are benefiting from a tax break. Right. They're small business owners that want certainty to make those tax cuts permanent so they can reinvest and build their businesses. And yes, call your congressman, write your congressman, write your two senators, publish those letters, either a challenge to the congressman or a thank you to the congressman. Publish those in the local paper. And last but not least, make sure you let your local Chamber of Commerce know. We're there to amplify those voices.
That's right. That's right. There's no question about it. Get involved. And to your point, that those letters mean so much. I think that a small business owner thinks, well, there's 30 million of us out there, and what are they going to read my letter or what have you? They do. Those offices, because I know some congressmen and senators, and they do. Their staff read those letters, and it means a lot because they want to get a feel for the pulse of what's, or I should say, they want to get a pulse of the kind of the sentiment out there in their among their constituents, and so those letters do mean a lot. There's no question about it, right?
They really do. So not only do small business owners have to be the CPA and the custodian and the CEO, they also have to be their own lobbyist. We're there to help them, but they are their best own lobbyists.
That's right. Tom Sullivan, Vice President of Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Keep up the great fight for us out there, and appreciate all the time you've given us here at ASBN.
Jim, we appreciate you. Thank you for having me on.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of the U.S. Chamber